who are, for example, asking for a Sharia state or for the Caliphate state do not have a place in Germany. And that is not our policy, that is not our political will, and we are clearly giving the message: who is willing to implement a Caliphate state in Germany is not welcomed in this country.
Germany is one of the most popular and prosperous countries in the world. It is a leader in the European Union, and thanks to its impressive economy, it has managed to maintain a foothold when matters of global importance are being discussed. That said, Germany's status as an economic and nuclear powerhouse has also meant that the country has been one of the top destinations for immigrants.
Welcome to Germany. Look at these smiles.
And like many in the developed world, it is now facing a considerable rise in backlash against its immigration policies.
Now, Germany has begun imposing tighter controls at all of the country's borders. The government says the measures will help tackle illegal migration and protect the public from threats such as Islamist extremism.
The interesting thing about Germany's fight against illegal immigration is that the country itself has a bit of a rough history with outsiders, as we all know. And now, decades after the country got on the wrong side of history, it appears that its efforts to create a more diverse and inclusive society have put it in some bit of trouble. With a changing political landscape and an economy threatened by stagnation, many are wondering whether this would be a great time for Germany to rethink its immigration policies and follow the path blazed by several other European nations in terms of tightening its acceptance policies. Germany, a haven for refugees and immigrants. If you think about it, Germany just might be one of the most ideal places in the world for anyone to move to. The country is one of the most prosperous in the world, with a gross domestic product that outpaces any other nation in the European Union by a mile. With a relatively diverse population and a wealth of advancement to boast of, it's easy to see the allure of this country. Of course, a lot of people know this, and they've been taking advantage of that fact and moving into Germany in their numbers. According to official statistics, Germany currently is the country that attracts the second highest number of immigrants in the world. The top country, of course, is the United States. So you know that's yet another feather in the cap of old Uncle Sam. With an estimated 15.8 million immigrants as of 2020, Germany has continued to be a hotbed for many immigrants, particularly from the Middle East and North Africa, where many indigenous people have sadly been displaced due to wars and conflicts tearing their countries apart. Besides Germany's impressive economy, immigrants have also been attracted to the country thanks to its accepting immigration policies. On several occasions, Germany has stepped up to accept immigrants and integrate them into its society. And the most popular of these instances came in 2015, when Germany stepped up to be a leader as Europe battled a major migrant crisis. At the time, then-Chancellor Angela Merkel proclaimed her decision to allow thousands of asylum seekers to cross the border into Germany following the suspension of the Dublin Regulation, a European Union regulation restricting migrants' rights to claim asylum in the EU member state they first set foot in. As a result of this decision, Germany became a hotbed of migrant movements. Between 2015 and 2017, the country took in about half of all asylum seekers submitted across the EU, with 2015 alone seeing about 1.1 million applications. Merkel's decision was met with fierce criticism at the time. One of the critics' key concerns in 2015 was that the failure to close Germany's borders to potential refugees would create a pull effect, where more people looking to leave their countries around the world would seemingly see Germany as the best destination. And, as they explained, this would lead to increased levels of migration into Germany. To be fair, these concerns were not unfounded. It's true that when a country has uncontrolled immigration levels, there could be challenges. From increases in crime rates to unemployment and much more, there are several reasons why anyone would be wary of a country whose borders are just too open. At the same time, they were also kind of in line with the times. You see, like many other countries, Germany was adjusting to what appeared to have been a growing populist movement that focused on migration and the consequences of unchecked immigration. Back in 2015, when Donald Trump began his campaign to be president of the United States, he amplified what appeared to be a major populist move that focused on closing borders and making it more difficult for immigrants to enter the United States. Whether it was his commitment to implement a so-called Muslim ban or his desire to build a massive wall across America's southern border, Trump made everyone understand that he was against open borders and primarily focused on ensuring the security of the country from what he believed to be enemies of the state. The moment Trump got into the White House, he made no delays in implementing his anti-immigration policies. Besides just restricting people from coming in, however, he also oversaw a massive deportation campaign that focused on rooting out illegal immigrants who had entered the United States and sending them back to their home country. Trump's ascent to the White House, as well as the world stage, by virtue of his position, was a significant turning point for millions around the world. Now, we can all debate over his policies as much as we want, but there's one thing you can't deny. That man tapped into a very popular sentiment and basically took what many people wanted and made it mainstream. Following the former U.S. president's rise, several other right-wing heads of state began to crop up. From Venezuela to Brazil and much more, it appeared that more countries saw what Trump was doing and began adopting similar stances. Again, the interesting thing here was that a lot of citizens were the ones speaking out and demanding action on immigration. This wasn't like one of those cases where a government or a group of politicians would enact a policy and it'd be incredibly unpopular among the people. Here it was a case where citizens themselves were demanding action. For Germany, the point eventually came in 2015. At the height of the European migration crisis, Germany took in a mind-boggling 1.5 million asylum seekers. Some sources even have higher estimates. After Chancellor Merkel claimed that she wanted to make Germany a haven for millions of displaced people, she received a lot of backlash, much of it coming from those who could see the writing on the wall and were concerned about what this could mean for Germany as a country. However, in response to this backlash, she famously said, "We can do this." Now, at this time, Merkel and her immigration policies had the support of the vast majority of Germans. Nevertheless, those who didn't like this policy were also seeing surging numbers. And in fact, the controversy surrounding immigration led to the rise of Germany's AfD party. The far-right party had mostly been focusing more on maintaining the strength of the euro and ensuring that Germany's government remained fiscally responsible. However, their opposition to Merkel's immigration policies, driven largely by the same concerns of economic unsustainability, saw them win an unprecedented number of seats in Germany's parliament. Nevertheless, as we've explained, Germany forged ahead with this mass immigration policy. In fact, this policy led to Germany becoming one of Europe's most ethnically diverse countries. The number of immigrants in the country surged from about 7 million to about 12 million during Merkel's tenure. And according to some sources, almost 30% of all Germans had some sort of immigrant background as of 2023, a sharp rise from the 18% recorded when Germany began taking the record back in 2005. The pro-migrant policy continued until 2021 when Merkel left office. She was replaced by Olaf Scholz, who rode a coalition wave that swept into power. The coalition majorly featured two parties, the Alliance 90, also known as the Greens, and the Social Democratic Party, or SPD. Both parties were to the left of Merkel's Christian Democrats when you consider the political spectrum, and with the two parties having a considerable amount of clout in parliament, it appeared that Germany was going to continue its pro-immigration policy, even despite growing sentiment that this wasn't necessarily the right move. Scholz himself had been a member of Merkel's administration, serving as her finance minister. So it seemed like a no-brainer for him to continue with some of the work his former boss had begun. In fact, the incoming government didn't just commit to continue with rapid immigration. In its manifesto, it also pledged to push frontier countries in the European Union to end their migration pushback policies. Now, a side note, EU frontier countries are a group of 16 nations within the EU that have external land borders. These countries include Croatia, Bulgaria, Slovakia, France, Latvia, Poland, Sweden, and even Germany. They represent about 250 border crossing points for the different transport modes into Europe. And as you can imagine, they tend to be the entry points for migrants looking to get into the continent. Anyways, once the Scholz administration took over, it seemed like business as usual. and the government looked to be committed to keeping Merkel's work on immigration. However, less than 9 months after rising to power, Scholz was faced with a new migrant crisis, one within Europe itself. In February of 2022, Russia and Ukraine got locked in a bloody, destabilizing conflict. After Ukraine had made public its decision to join NATO, the Kremlin saw this as a no-no. And, looking to seemingly protect its interests, Russia invaded Ukraine. The conflict was intense. To date, an estimated 450 to 800,000 people have been killed, with millions more being displaced. And many of these people have been Ukrainian. Left with no other choice, a lot of Ukrainians have been forced to leave their homeland for their safety. And this means finding somewhere else to stay. Enter Germany. Since 2022, Germany has so far taken well over 1 million Ukrainian asylum seekers. And in the summer of 2023, the country's parliament even passed new legislation that made it much easier for asylum seekers and refugees to enter the country. The policy included a point-based system, which had reduced criteria for things like educational qualifications and proficiency in German as a language. In a way, the move kind of made sense. Besides the fact that this policy and many more essentially made it easier for more people fleeing the conflict in Eastern Europe to find safety, Germany itself had also been facing a bit of a labor shortage issue. As a result of the country's Sing population, many German businesses had actually pressed the government to bring in more skilled workers to prop up their workforce. The government's 180-degree turn. But in this never-ending saga, there appears to be a fresh twist. The tide is now shifting, and in the past few months, the German government has implemented a new set of rules that place major restrictions on immigration. Even worse, the government appears to be going further, enacting policies that also focus on ramping up deportations from the country. Following a meeting with members of his regional government, Scholz declared that Germany had reached its capacity with migrants and that the government would now be introducing new measures to address the issue. The measures, which were enacted in November, included cutting benefits to migrants and making it easier to deport people who were refused refugee status. Another interesting measure included the withdrawal of cash grants to refugees. Instead, these refugees were given special debit cards, which allowed them to make purchases at local businesses and supermarkets. The debit cards worked nationally, but operators couldn't use them to withdraw cash at ATMs. According to the new finance minister, the goal of this was to reduce the appeal of Germany's welfare system to potential refugees, thereby reducing their likelihood of entering the country. Elsewhere, the new policies expanded the authority for law enforcement to search the accommodations of refugees and gain access to their personal digital data in order to determine whether they were legal or illegal immigrants. The Interior Minister even confirmed that the deportations would focus more on people who engaged in any form of organized crime. In response to questions about why it was suddenly doing a 180 on its initial policies, the government has claimed that its new stance isn't necessarily a departure from the previous one. Instead, it claimed it was simply tightening its restrictions on illegal migration, which had become a major issue. In its manifesto, the coalition government claimed that its goal would be to encourage legal immigration while curbing illegal entry. So there's a bit of an argument to that effect. However you coin it, though, it's pretty clear that the German government had marked a departure from Merkel's optimistic pro-immigration stance. So why? What changed? To be fair, there isn't a singular answer to describe why Germany's government was now backtracking. The most prominent, of course, is the same one that had people concerned in the first place. Sure, bringing more people in is the humane thing to do, but it just isn't sustainable. In 2023 alone, the number of asylum applications to Germany rose by a staggering 73% from the year before. Many refugee shelters are now running above their operating capacity, and regional authorities are raising the alarm over the financial sustainability of this initiative. Things get even worse when you consider the fact that Germany, like many other countries in the developed world, has been battling through an inflation crisis. Remember, when the coronavirus pandemic hit, the entire world pretty much was thrown into a tailspin. Lockdowns were imposed across the board, and businesses had to shut down. With no other option, governments began throwing buckets of cash at the citizens in the form of relief funds and palliatives. The goal was simple. Since people couldn't work, they should at least get some financial assistance to help them deal with mounting bills and the other challenges they were facing. Once again, this was a case of the right thing being done, but terrible consequences coming after. Although good-natured, the issue with this policy was that the government didn't necessarily have a strategy for sucking this excess cash out of circulation once the world had gone back to normal. Every day, citizens now had more money in their hands, leading to many of them making impulse purchases. Soon enough, prices rose and economies began to grind once more. Germany's economy was one of the hardest hit in Europe. Costs of both necessities and luxuries skyrocketed, with many companies having to shut down and more people being out of their jobs. Basically, Germany was now put in a palace where it had a very limited amount of resources to go around. Add to this the fact that more migrants were coming in, and you can see just how unsustainable this whole policy of open borders was. Another major reason why the government decided to backtrack on the PTO immigration stance was that it was bowing to political pressure. Remember the AfD party that we mentioned earlier? Well, over the years, the party had grown to become a major political bloc in parliament. By the latter part of 2023, the AfD had been polling at an unprecedented 21%, much higher than Scholz's SPD party, as well as the Greens. Regional elections in areas such as Hesse and Bavaria also underscored this. The AfD gained more votes, while the government coalition bled voters by the thousands. Even worse, the Christian Democrats, Merkel's party no less, appeared to have noticed the changing landscape and moved accordingly. The party had leaned more to the right recently, beginning in 2022 when it elected its new leader, Friedrich Merz, a noted staunch conservative who opposed Merkel's immigration policies from the beginning. Hold on, scratch that. Merz isn't just some moderate-type conservative. This guy is pretty hardcore. In 2018, he advocated for removing the right to asylum from Germany's constitution altogether. So you can imagine that he wouldn't be thrilled about this whole pro-immigration thing one bit. The moment Merz became the leader of the opposition, he piled on the pressure. He advocated for speeding up deportations, and with his party now firmly behind him, he didn't back down. You see, once again, it's worth remembering that this isn't just a case of politicians doing stuff for their personal agendas. As much as it can be difficult to admit, these people are actually latching on to an increasingly popular stance. 64% of respondents to a national survey conducted back in 2023 claimed that they didn't believe Germany was benefiting much from asylum. To make things even more interesting, the survey grouped respondents according to their political parties, and the results were still pretty negative towards immigration. 96% of those who identified with the AfD responded negatively towards immigration, as did 70% of Christian Democrats and 49% of those affiliated with the SDP. Even the Greens, who are known to be a tad more liberal than the others, saw a 22% negative rating towards increased immigration. So the sentiment appeared pretty spread, no matter how you swung it. The fact remains that a lot of Germans really didn't think that immigration was in their best interest. And this new crop of far-right politicians definitely knew it. Now they had the extra ammunition of public opinion to go with their policies. Still, it doesn't stop there. You see, just as it was when Russia and Ukraine began their conflict, the war between Israel and Hamas in the Middle East and West Bank has also intensified the pressure on Germany. Like the war that began in 2022, the Israel-Hamas conflict has led to an even higher number of refugees looking for a home in Germany, a factor that definitely contributed to the 73% rise in applications for Germany in 2023 alone. However, I think it's safe to say that this conflict also isn't like any other. Unlike the Russia-Ukraine war, which had a fallout that appeared to be pretty localized, this one has had far-reaching consequences, the most prominent of which is anti-Semitism. Since the Israel-Hamas war began, Germany alone has seen well over 20 cases of anti-Semitism being reported. These instances have come pretty much everywhere in the public space, and the cases honestly just keep getting higher. Now, it is worth noting that anti-Semitism isn't a peculiar thing to Germany. All across Europe and the rest of the developed world, there has been a notable rise in related incidents, with governments and other notable people looking for ways to at least de-escalate the situation. But as I'm sure you can imagine, Germany is one country that definitely doesn't want to be related to anti-Semitism. Go check out what happened between 1935 and 1945, just to be sure. Looking to get a handle on the situation, the government has tried to take action. At a press conference, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier even went as far as suggesting that German Arabs should denounce Hamas. And the Interior Ministry also banned a pro-Palestine group after claiming that it had links to Hamas. At the end of the day, the truth remains that everything that's been going on in the Middle East is now having knock-on effects that are being felt in Germany. And just like we're seeing in countries like Britain and even the United States, there is a growing and present fear that these cases of public unrest will only continue to grow the longer this conflict drags on. That said, there doesn't seem to be any indication that the end of this conflict could be coming soon too. Israel and Hamas are dedicated to seemingly destroying each other, and most of the countries with the wherewithal to do anything about it are currently occupied with matters of their own national security. So if this conflict persists, does this mean that Germans and many other developed countries will keep seeing escalations in tensions at home? Well, who knows? Immigration as a hot-button issue. Things couldn't also come at a worse time for anyone with a pro-immigration stance. As in 2016, the American elections have once again loomed large over much of the events happening in the developed world. And once again, the issue of immigration has taken center stage. Whether it is those who believe that migrants are taking away domestic jobs or those who claim that refugees are contributing to the crime epidemic, there is no doubt that there will be people taking the opportunity to scapegoat immigrants for many of the ills befalling Germany. In the meantime, the German government is doing its bit to stamp down on any form of extremism. In July, the federal government shut down 4 mosques across the country. This action affected the popular Blue Mosque, located in Hamburg. Named due to its ornate blue tiles, the mosque, officially named the Imam Ali Mosque, is one of the oldest in Germany. And according to the government, this action was taken due to the mosque's perceived links with extremism. Going a bit deeper, the German government explained that the mosques in question were attached to an organization named Islamisches Zentrum Hamburg, which loosely translates to Islamic Center Hamburg, or ICH. German authorities say ICH acts as a front for the Iranian regime, propagating an Islamist extremist and totalitarian ideology, besides aggressive anti-Semitism. A state-owned media house also cited German intelligence's claims that the ICH is considered an extension of the Iranian regime in Germany, with prior raids even establishing connections with Hezbollah. That said, a statement from the Interior Ministry also noted that this action shouldn't be considered an attack against Islam as a religion. We are drawing a clear distinction between the Islamist extremists that we are cracking down on and the many Muslims who belong to our country and live according to their faith. This ban absolutely does not apply to the peaceful practice of the Shiite religion, the statement said. Still, as you can imagine, this hasn't necessarily gone down well with a lot of people. Although the government remains adamant that the mosques that were shut down had links with extremist groups, many have basically pointed to the recent trend towards a more anti-immigration stance as evidence of a grander conspiracy here. Whatever it is, Germany's government appears to be focusing more on stemming the tide of anti-Semitism. And as the entire world looks on to see how the conflict between Israel and Hamas plays out, there are always opportunities for the government to change things up and try other methods of handling the fallout in the country. At the same time, there's a growing feeling that the outcome of the elections in the United States could weigh very heavily on the outcome, even in Germany. Already, immigration has become a major talking point at the elections. And depending on who wins, the immigration policies they adopt could easily be a harbinger for things to come in Germany. In the end, it's still a bit too early to see whether this whole change will be permanent for Germany or if it's more of a transient thing. Remember, this is a country whose citizens were overwhelmingly in favor of immigration a few years ago. Now that the tide seems to be changing, who knows whether another reset is coming? For now, however, it appears the government is looking to maintain a more restrained response. What do you think, though? Is Germany already too saturated? Could the mosque shutdowns continue? Let us know in the comments.